Hey everyone, this is Nick with Tenacity.ai with my co-host Jason, and you're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Today we're going to follow up on our conversation from last time. We're going to talk about getting foundational rhythms in place to manage your organization. We keep this at a high level, think about frameworks. How do you actually stay on top of your budget? Because one of the worst things you can do is actually wait till the month end, or wait till, worst yet, is wait till quarter end and do a look back at your budget, because at that point it's too late. You've already spent the money, and you want to stay on top of your budget and spending depending on what your goals are. So I guess, Jason, just, from a starting point, you and I have implemented and been a part of multiple organizations where we've implemented execution frameworks. You want to talk a little bit about sort of what makes a great, or what makes a good execution framework, depending on the size of, the team and who's in it and what you're trying to achieve?
Well, we use the Rockefeller habits. There's another one called EOS, I think, Entrepreneur something systems. They're very similar to each other, but it's a framework to organize probably smaller companies. I don't know where the limit is, and when I say smaller, I mean sub hundreds of employees, right, a few hundred employees. I'm not so sure where the limit is, but maybe there isn't. But anyway, implementing, especially for, startups and growth stage companies, implementing something like the Rockefeller habits or EOS, or any framework that empowers the collective group of people at the organization to, one, understand what they need to provide from goals, reporting, KPIs, whatever those things are that you define as part of this, but also the organization's goals. But it also empowers the employees to feel comfortable bringing not only good news but bad news to people, especially when it comes to budget. Because bad news is what you really want. You want to know before things happen if they're an issue. So implementing a framework that helps organize the entire company itself, as well as the communication around it, I think is the first step.
Yeah, I think if I break it down really simply, there's tons of frameworks out there. You can go look. I'm sure Gartner or somebody has an article on all sorts of frameworks you can use depending on the size of your organization. But for to break it down, the components that make up a good framework, and use only the pieces that you need for your organization, is rhythm, cadence, and your metrics. So your rhythm is your definition. What are you actually going to do? And your cadence is how frequently you're going to do it. And your metrics are what you're actually going to look at, what's important. And those things can all change. So to give an example, we have a defined rhythm of meeting every day for a very brief period of time, 5 minutes, to review what's going on, right? So that's an update, a huddle. Right. And we have a part of our rhythm, which is reviewing every week more broadly as a team what's going on, and taking a deeper dive on our internal metrics. Right. And then we have a number of metrics that we manage or measure to. Of course, as a startup, right, we're measuring things like revenue and burn rate. And, there's even the number of leads and sales meetings that we have coming up, right? But if you're thinking in terms of your internal organization, your IT organization, those might be a little different. We'll talk about those in a moment. But so that's kind of rhythm. Our cadence, daily on huddles, weekly on those weekly meetings, and there's a few other things in there, but I'm going to just touch on those. And then, of course, the metrics, what you measure. And so I think it's important to define that for yourself, and this helps you stay on top of your budget and your cloud spending, because if you're daily getting an understanding of, say, anomalies, right? So let's say you are operating in a cloud environment and you have an event, and suddenly there's an anomaly that predicts, a 20% change in your spending. Mm-hmm. You want to know that the day it happens, at best case, and no more than maybe the day after it happens, because right. When you get to the end of the month, and if it happened on the 5th of the month and now you're reviewing it on the 30th of the month, That's too late. You've already
Probably.
Yeah, probably too late.
I mean, you might be able to course correct, right? It's possible, but wouldn't you rather know less than 25 days in advance or something like that? It would be nice to know on at least a weekly basis, or for that matter, when you know that you're potentially, your variance is going outside of your budget limits. I mean, whenever you can tell that, it's best to know it early as possible. So waiting 25 days does you nothing because that month's budget is already gone.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the metrics, Jason, that you would think about measuring from a cloud spending perspective? If you were in a large organization, you have a large spend, you have a complex environment. What are some of the things you would want to know on a daily, weekly rhythm?
Definitely allocation, to whatever my context is, whether that's customer, business unit, product, whatever. Right. I mean,
you want to understand spending to that. So there's some budget. Yes. You've allocated out to a budget, and you want to understand spending towards that allocation.
Towards my budget, as well as the total budget towards spending. Right. I mean, that's kind of table stakes. I want to know what portion of my environment isn't allocated. What are those things? I want to understand on a weekly basis what is being done to ensure my environment, the cloud environment, is running at an optimal pace. Because, I mean, it is the biggest problem in cloud is sprawl, right? I mean, or one of the biggest problems. It's probably the biggest problem. I mean, 30%. I mean, at this point this year, where the economy is going, layoffs happening left and right, overspending is the biggest problem, right? Nobody's focused on security right now. They just aren't. It's crazy, but I mean, think about it this way. We talk to people in IT departments all the time, right, that are faced with these challenges. What's crazy to me is that they're all focused on cost optimization and spend, right? And they're not focused on security because they're focused on cost optimization and spend. I think that if we get a handle on our budgets, optimization from a cloud perspective, some of those resources can go back into making sure that our cloud is secure, which is the second biggest problem. Not because the cloud isn't secure, but just because people don't spend enough time to make sure that it's secure. So I think, making sure that you have these processes in place to, detect, make, and provide all the information to whoever the stakeholders are in your cloud center of excellence, right? Operations, finance, security, whoever sits in those stakeholder group, being able to provide them how you're operating the environment, why it's optimal, what you can do to save more money, areas in which you can improve performance or whatever it may be, I think is a few of the important things you need to provide on probably a weekly basis, depending on the size of your cloud environment, probably no less than semi-weekly.
Yeah, I would think that on a daily basis, I would want to know, anomalies. One, have there been any anomalies that have cropped up in the spending? I would want to know if there's any active alerts, right? Is there any open or active alerts around my cloud spending? Have I just received an alert that my forecasted variance will be above whatever my, maybe above budget, maybe it's a threshold I have. Is it above 3%? I'm okay with the 3% variance, but if it's below that, we're going to leave it alone. If it's above that, I got to take action. You can determine what those are for your organization. I think if I were looking at, I think you touched on some of the weekly ones. Another daily one to me would be some organizations are going to want to review what's the new infrastructure inside of my environment. What's been created, or what's been destroyed as well.
What's been destroyed
that's another
too.
Important one.
Who created it?
Right.
Why?
Yeah. I would say that we didn't talk about a monthly rhythm, but it is important from an operational perspective to think in terms of what saving instruments or discount instruments are going to expire. So those being reviewed in a rhythm where if in the next 30 days you're going to have a savings plan or an RI plan or some other instrument that's going to expire on you. I think that's significant. I think it's also important in that monthly rhythm to evaluate costs around storage, to review really configuration, especially in new infrastructure like your snapshots, et cetera, just to make sure that you're setting up things like versioning correctly and setting up things like snapshot policies to only retain snapshots as long as you actually need them, not to hold them forever and ever, because that can actually spiral your costs out of control as well. Those are, you want to kind of think about these metrics. You don't need a ton of them. You need indicators so that you can dive deep when an indicator, fires off for you.
Maybe 5.
Maybe 5, right? In 5 kind of in your, 2 to 3 important ones in your daily, kind of 5 total in your daily and weekly. And then you probably have some monthly review items that you want to go through.
I agree.
Let's talk about cadence, because sometimes, for some organizations, daily might be a little too aggressive. Totally understand that. But it can also be weekly might mean you only have 4 chances to catch something before your budget can spiral out of control. I've experienced cadences across a variety of organizations. I do find daily to be extremely effective because it's very quick. It's very kind of hit on its communication. If you just make it a daily Slack message or a daily email, you're going to ignore it. Guarantee it. Seen it over and over again. But if you make it actually a daily conversation between at least 2 folks that say, "Yep, all systems are normal," or "Wait a minute, we have this thing we need to keep our eye on. We'll watch it until tomorrow," whatever.
I agree with you.
Helps.
I think daily is 5 minutes daily.
Tops.
Right? Tops. Make sure that everybody's on the same page. I would say, depending on the size of the organization or the size of the spend, right? Necessity also, right? If I'm spending $5,000 a month in the cloud, I probably don't need to do this daily, right? But if I'm spending $500,000 a month, I absolutely do. So I would say, daily, weekly, a daily rhythm, a weekly rhythm, which is a little bit more in depth, probably more like a half an hour long, with an agenda, with more stakeholders on the phone to understand the KPIs. There's a lot of good materials out there around Cloud Center of Excellence from all of the cloud providers, and kind of prescribes for you who should be stakeholders in this Cloud Center of Excellence, which is the framework or format for delivering the information we're talking about. And then probably daily, weekly, and then probably either a monthly or a quarterly, probably more of a quarterly meeting where you're not only talking about what's happened, what am I doing to operate it, but you're talking about what's coming, right? From a goal perspective, what new things are coming in, maybe it's an acquisition, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So you have a more strategic quarterly meeting with the group, maybe.
That, thinking in terms of the time boxing of those, and our listeners should be familiar with time boxing. You've existed in the agile world for a very long time. So thinking in terms of time boxing should help drive also kind of tool decisions, because if you're unable to achieve a 5-minute sort of huddle around your key metrics, then you want to review your tools. Because you shouldn't be spending 30 minutes a day or an hour a day. We've talked to organizations that will put an engineer on this task monthly and spend days, like literally, 20 hours on something to produce the necessary metrics to look at, kind of a look back on budget and how things are going. So you also want to think about your tools in terms of that time box. You want to be able to review something in 5 minutes in a day. You don't want to spend your whole day trying to understand your cloud spending and trying to figure out.
They should be at your fingertips. These KPIs, these reports, and if they're not at your fingertips, reach out, because they should be. And it should be easy for you to understand all this data. Absolutely. In your context.
Absolutely. And there's a number of tools out there. Tenacity, of course, is one of them, but there's a number of platforms out there that can help you. I think that probably wraps the show for this week or today. We'll come back with some more topics that are around kind of the start of the year and the things that you need to be thinking about in order to get your budgeting right. You're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Go out and visit tenacity.ai. Sign up for a demo, check out the platform. Love to show it to you. Love to have you as a guest on the show. Thank you so much for listening.